On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're breaking down our updated trade targets. We're taking a look at the deadline priorities as they may have changed, as well as asking the question, should the Bolts sell? All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today, we're talking about our updated trade targets. You may have seen that popping around our social media pages and forums. We'll break that down. We'll talk about the Lightning's deadline priorities, as well as asking ourselves the question, should the Bolts sell after their recent string of losses? We'll get into that all and more on today's episode, but please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, and drop a comment below. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know how you feel about this list we're about to talk to you about. And a reminder also as well, we are now on Discord and Reddit. Definitely want to continue the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe or follow us on one of those forums. So we're talking about our updated trade targets, and we're going to drop this in our YouTube channel comments after we post today. And this was a list that I put together myself based off of the Lightning's needs at that time. And this was about 2 nights ago. So Wednesday night, this is when I put this together. And I will say, as a disclaimer, I think that the Lightning's needs have slightly changed since then. This is also kind of a wishful thinking kind of trade list. So I listed the top 5 Lightning trade deadline targets, and we posted it to our social media platform. So go ahead, check that out if you want to follow along. It's on our Locked On Lightning Twitter page. So at number 1 is Noah Hanifin. Of course, if you've been listening to this podcast for at least the last couple, probably 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we've been very high on Noah Hanifin. That is a name that until recently has not really been associated with the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I think that it would be a beneficial situation to both parties. Apparently, according to Frank Cervelli, of Daily Faceoff, Hanifin does want to come to Tampa Bay. As for how the money in a long-term deal might work, really, in my opinion, that would be based off of, who is coming back next year for the Tampa Bay Lightning and who is staying. I think that, as much as I hate to keep bringing this up, but it's really true, is that, if Stamkos leaves, which I think at this point we could all mutually agree that that is not something that is a surefire thing. And I see a lot of people commenting, as they should, that's the captain of the team. That's the emotional leader of this team. And you never want to lose someone like that. I completely agree. And I hope that the Bolts and Stamkos can work something out. But especially going into the offseason when he's kind of sort of on the downslope of the bet, or let's more delicate way to say, the back end of his career. He still has about 5-6 years in him, I think, a little bit more maybe, with Stamkos' extensive injury background. I don't know how much gas he's got left in the tank physically, but he's definitely someone that could play maybe another 5 to 6 years. But it all depends on how other teams value him, and that might actually help the Lightning in the long term in terms of re-signing him. If other teams aren't as bullish on getting Steven Stamkos, that might cause him to come back to Tampa Bay and take a little less money than what he originally wanted. We'll keep a pin in that one. But number 2 on our list is Sean Walker, the defenseman from Philly. We've talked about him before, as well as his podcast on this podcast, because when the rumblings of the Lightning's possibly going in for a defenseman at the trade deadline started, that was the name at the top of the list. I'm putting it there mainly because if there is any merit to these rumors that Walker is available by Philadelphia, which I don't believe is a realistic thing. Like I said, and I'll continue to say this until we actually see something from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is in the middle of a playoff race. They're top 3 in the Metropolitan Division. I don't understand. And I saw someone did tweet to me about the reason why Philly would want to trade some of its players because they don't feel like they can win in the long term with these guys. But I don't buy it. I don't understand why you're trading away defensemen, centers, which are, in my opinion, the two, other than goaltending, when you're going into a playoff run or have aspirations of making a playoff run. Why would you do that? Especially, and it's just a bad move to make, especially, I don't know how your fans would, especially in Philadelphia, I don't know how your fans would be able to let you get away with that. So I just put up Walker there just because, if Philly does decide to show their true cards, and that's exactly what the rumors have been for the last couple of weeks, I just put him there because, that could be a good backup option for the Tampa Bay Lightning if they cannot work out a deal to get Hanifin. Number 3 on the list is because, and I'll give you a little preface for this, the Lightning have struggled with two things really, and they go hand in hand, is their depth scoring. Outside of the second line, we haven't seen a whole ton of scoring from them this year, other than guys like Nick Paul and Anthony Cirelli here and there. I know Cirelli has been on the second line most of the year, but Paul has been on the third line. And you've seen, sporadic scoring from other guys here and there throughout the course of the year. Last night, for example, Tyler Mott was one of those guys that scored on the lower lines. Other than that, we haven't really seen much of anything from those lower lines. But really, I think that if a deal were to be able to get reached, I think that the Lightning, especially with the situation that is going on in Anaheim, I think Frank Vetrano, the left winger, and he could play on both sides. It doesn't have to be explicitly on the left wing. He would be a good addition. He could play physical. He's a smart player. He's a veteran. We know him. Lightning fans might remember him from his time with the Florida Panthers, and then last year he was in New York for a little bit as well. His contract does expire after this year, I believe. So that would be kind of something that the Lightning could explore in terms of possibly re-signing him. But I think that the Lightning will not be explicitly held to just picking up a defenseman at the deadline. I think they do need to go for some scoring and go for some guys like Frank Vetrano or another name that I will pick up in just a little bit. Number 4 is Chris Tanev, another guy from Calgary. I'm just putting him up there because he's a veteran defenseman. Am I crazy about having him? Not really, but when I look at the other defensemen, and this also goes hand in hand with like how realistic of a possibility this is that the Lightning would pick up a guy like this. And I spoke about it on, I think it was a couple episodes ago, where, I spoke about Jacob Chikrin, a defenseman who was very much high on the list of any team or really just on the list of trade deadline targets or people that are available. And that would be great to have Jacob Chikrin on the Lightning. But is it realistic? No, it's not, because he plays for Ottawa, and there's no reason as to why Ottawa would give Jacob Chikrin to the Lightning, and if they do so, not try to completely fleece the Lightning out of a bunch of picks. And so I don't see that happening. So Chris Tanev's there just because he's a backup to the backup, which is Sean Walker. And you know what? He's really at this point, and I'm not downgrading his talent or anything, but it's just a situation of just trying to get an extra body on the team just to survive the rest of the season, especially without Mikhail Sergachev. And then our 5th and final target on this list is Pavel Buchnevich from the St. Louis Blues. Now, Pavel Buchnevich reminds me, I mean, he's got a little bit more flair to his game in terms of around the right people in the right line, he could get a little bit more scoring for you. But he does remind me a bit of Tanner Janelle, but in a positive way. As we all know, Tanner Janelle has not really played well consistently this year and really throughout his very short tenure in Tampa Bay. But you get a guy like Pavel Buchnevich, who has a ton of experience, who's been around for quite some time, who has experience playing with teams that are making the playoffs almost on a yearly basis. You get a guy like that, I feel like it kind of offsets the sins of getting Tanner Janelle. And I think at the end of the day, you know, if you get Buchnevich and you could sign him to a long-term deal, and we'll talk about more about this in the second segment as we talk about priorities at the deadline. I think that really at the end of the day, you get a guy like Buchnevich, you sign him to a long-term deal, and then you're able to kind of move Jeannot to the lower lines. You know, because Jeannot on the third line as of right now, not a good pairing right there, I think, for what you're getting out of him. I think really we could all agree he's a fourth line guy right now at this point. He just has to play his way up consistently. You get a guy like Buchnevich, you put him on the third line, you kind of almost get what you were supposed to get out of Jeannot from him. You get him alongside Esamont and Paul. I think that's a good third line and a sustainable line. So let me know in the comments below this video on YouTube, or if you want to reach out to the show on any other forum, whether it be on our Reddit page or on Discord or on, what am I missing? Twitter, wherever you want to reach out to us, or if you want to reach out to me personally at DenkyDenk, DENKYD8NK on Twitter, go ahead and do that as well. Let me know how you feel about this list. We're going to be posting it down in the description, actually in the comments below. We'll pin it at the top on our YouTube page. So let me know in the comments how you're feeling about this. It's not perfect. It's not something that I believe that the Lightning could actually pull off. It's more of like a wish list. So, you know, take it as you will. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about deadline priorities, and then we'll finish things off with the question that I think a lot of people started to ask themselves last night. Should the Lightning sell? We'll be covering all of that coming up in just a few minutes. But first, I want to talk about our first sponsors of the day, and then is our friends over at Indeed. Now, we're driven by search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Now, if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. I always talk about it when we talk about Indeed here on Locked On Lightning. I had a friend who started his own business. It grew way faster than he expected it to. The need for employees was dire, and he didn't know, so he tried Indeed, and guess what? He found 4 to 5 good quality people within a matter of days, and it was all thanks to Indeed's matching algorithm. So listeners right now of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility, and at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now for any support, so to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Lightning. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. We're also available on Reddit, where, you know, you could hit us up on our Twitter page, LO_lightning. You could give me a follow. I mean, we don't really post a lot to Instagram. We definitely want to, but we'll try our best to start updating that. But you could definitely reach us basically on everything else. So we just got done talking about the trade deadline targets. But like I said at the top of that segment, that, you know, I think that that was a list that we came out with or put together Wednesday night and didn't post till yesterday around noon or so, or whatever time it was. But I think last night kind of it kind of made us revisit what this team needs, because we basically went from the span of a week to, we just need a defenseman, throw him in there for Sergachev. And now it's been upgraded to, we need pretty much everything in terms of depth scoring and maybe a defenseman or so, just because these last 3 games have just really been astronomically pitiful from the Tampa Bay Lightning. You've seen some fight here and there. The Lightning came back from 3-1 last night against the Capitals, still only to lose. And I said on last night's episode after the game that really has to do with the fact that it's really from just their lack of depth. The fact that and they said it on ESPN, they beat me to the punch. They basically said it, and if you've been a listener, you know this. This was a game that the Lightning should win, and they haven't. They didn't. And with the upcoming schedule, as well as the trade deadline fastly approaching, which is going to be March 8th, you got to ask yourself, what do the Lightning need if we really want to stay in this playoff race? And really, they need just maybe a skater or two on the third line. Maybe throw Esamon down. But then again, we are going to go over the conversation as we always do once again. The Lightning need A through Z, or whatever the case may be. But the problem is, what do they have in return? All they have is draft picks. Because if you look at their minor league system, other than Isaac Howard and maybe a couple of other players, there's really not much here that the Lightning can throw in the faces of other teams to make them bite on the trade line. And I don't think that a lot of Lightning fans, including myself, are keen at this point in time to trade our top prospects, because A, there's really not that many, and B, the Lightning are going to be short after the deadline if they do indeed go ahead and buy at the deadline, because they've traded pretty much a plethora of their draft picks, and the ones that they have aren't exactly going to be high quality draft picks either. So really, it's kind of a double-edged sword here. You're kind of getting worse by trying to get better, and that's the issue that the Tampa Bay Lightning have currently at this time. So really, I think that, and this kind of goes hand in hand, and we'll talk about this at the end of the show with what we're going to talk about, is that the next week, I think is really going to determine how drastic the priorities change from now until then. I think that especially with these upcoming games against the Islanders, the Devils, and the Flyers, those are going to be 3 pivotal games, not only because of the implications that they have in the wild card race in the East, but also because I think that if Julian Brisebois understands or starts to understand that maybe this is a little bit of a lost situation right now and we need to pack this away, maybe, they have to reevaluate what they want at the trade deadline. I know it's not a fun conversation to have. It's not a conversation that we've had on this podcast before, because the Lightning have been really, really successful and have, for the most part, around this time of year, have really played a lot better than what we've seen them. And I will say, though, at the same time, it's funny how quickly the script can flip in the NHL. I hinted at it before. You go from being on top of the world, beating 2 of the better teams in the league, Boston and Colorado, and it's like your mojo is completely lost because of that loss to the Florida Panthers, and now it's just the Lightning look like a team that is barely treading water out there in the Eastern Conference and just on the ice in general. So priorities, I will say at this moment in time, are just pick up some depth scoring, whether it be a Frank Vetrano, whether it be a Pavel Buchnevich, pick up a defenseman especially, just because for the long term. I stated it on a past episode that I think that in the end, if the Lightning want to do this trade deadline right, regardless of if they feel they need to sell or not, I think the best way to go about it if you're going after a Hannafin, if you're going after a Vetrano or a Buchnevich or a Walker, you're trading those guys for those guys, in order to eventually sign them to be part of the next foundation of Lightning hockey. We talk about that here and there, about how Kuch is not getting any younger. Hedman and Stamkos are starting to show their wear and tear. And, Kuch is still in the prime of his career. He's 30 years old, so, I'm not too worried about that. But Stamkos and Hedman, especially, that's kind of like the last of, I think, or I guess, how you want to view it, the two torch holders of this Lightning bedrock that is, what has been over the last couple of years, especially. And you got to start planning for the future. It's going to be Point, it's going to be Hagel, it's going to be Paul, it's going to be Kuch leading the way. Vasilevsky will still be around, of course. Mikhail Sergachev. Chernak, I know that might anger some people. But at the end of the day, I think that really you have to start planning. Because you're not going to get anything of value over the draft unless you get lucky. I mean, I think the Lightning already sold their souls by getting Point and Kucherov very late in their respective drafts. And I think that really the best way to build this team is from the outside until you kind of get a handle on what to do with the farm system in Syracuse as well as through Orlando. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, it's a tough situation. I mean, it's not a fun situation to talk about either because, I think we could all agree, we had very high expectations for this team coming into the season. And now we're on the verge of, and about to have the conversation about should the Lightning sell. So we'll break that down, talk about it in just a bit. But first, let's talk about our last sponsors of the day, and that is our friends over at Ibotta. Now, grocery bills are so expensive these days, but now they don't have to be. Start getting cash back on your grocery shopping with the free Ibotta app and get cash back every time you shop. Do you love making money? Who doesn't? But also love spending money? Who doesn't? Don't we all? Can you make you can make money while you spend it every time and you shop with Ibotta. Spring break is around the corner, which means you're going shopping, but don't shop for your big trip and get nothing in return. Make sure you're getting cash back every time you shop with Ibotta. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. So you could buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game you've been dying to go to, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. So right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONNHL when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use the code LOCKEDONNHL. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or at iTunes App Store and use the code LOCKEDONNHL. So wrapping things up on the show, I mean, it's not a fun conversation, but it's a conversation that I think at this point in time we need to have nonetheless. So let me start off by just listing off the standings as of today. So the Lightning are currently, as of today, in the wild card spot. They are second in the wild card spot. That is 5 points ahead of the Washington Capitals and a point behind the Detroit Red Wings. And I'd like to start off by saying I warned everybody that the Red Wings were no joke, that this was a team that if you give them enough breathing air, they're going to continue to climb up. And that's exactly what they did, picking up a big overtime win last night. And I warned everybody, this is a situation in which you don't want to be in, because it's one thing when you're in the wild card, when you're in the top three in your division, and really all you have to worry about is that one team behind you in the standings. But now the Lightning are in a very precarious position where they got to worry about everybody. And the way they've been playing over the last couple of games has been nothing short of, I think we could all agree, embarrassing. Their last 10 has not been really that thrilling either. They're 5-5. They're even on their goal differential in the season, which shows you how bad their defense is. And if you just want to get an idea, they've scored 198 goals this year. That is no little number right there. But the fact that they're even on the year just shows how putrid the defense and really mediocre the goaltending has been from Andrei Vasilevsky, especially. I mean, his numbers are good, but you don't see it on the ice. And now that we're nearly towards the end of February with the trade deadline not too far away, we have to ask ourselves, should the Lightning sell? Because this team, like I have stated multiple times, almost to exhaustion on this podcast, is that this is a team that is very up and down, has a lot of peaks and valleys, and there hasn't really been any middle ground with this team that we have seen consistently. Most times they, when they're at their highs, they look like they're one of the better teams in the league. When they're at their lows, they look like a draft lottery team. So really, now that leaves Julien Brisebois a very, very tough decision. When is he going to call time of death on the Lightning season? Because really, that's what selling is at this point. And at the same time, I've also seen a lot of people giving their kind of like, what in theory, if the Lightning were to sell, who's going and who's staying. And I don't necessarily agree with all of it. It really, I think at the end of the day, it also depends on what other teams are calling, because it's not like, Julien Brisebois could call up GMs A through B or A through F and say, listen, do you want so-and-so? And they could easily just say, no, we don't want that. We're not going to give this guy up. It's really not going to make much of a difference. Because the names I see that people are very upset about, as they should, because we've just had disappointing seasons out of these guys. Alex Barré-Boulet, who was sent down the other day. Calvin DeHaan, Hayden Fleury. I think Fleury has done a decent job. I don't think he's done spectacular this year. You have Tyler Mott, who I thought really hasn't been impressive this year. Connor Sherry has just been a very big disappointment. Like I said, I called him the other day Vlad Nemestikov 2.0. That's really what it is. I mean, you're really not getting anything for 1.5 mil right now. And Perbix as well. Nick Perbix has not played well this year. He like I said, he shows little flashes of kind of, he'll have like one good play per game, but that the Lightning need more than just one good play per game. So what I'm really trying to say is that, of the names that I've listed just now, realistically, what can the Lightning get back? I don't think any teams are giving up draft picks for that. I think we could agree that's not something that's going to happen. And at the same time, I mean, what else, could the Lightning potentially get? I mean, I spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. Julien Brisebois is going to have to get really creative at the deadline. Outside the names that we already listed earlier today in this episode, I mean, with those guys, how realistically can a team or Julien Brisebois go out and sell those guys? I mean, numbers are numbers at this point. And I think that when you look at where the Lightning are and where they're trending, like I said, I think these next 3 games are going to be very important for them. The Islanders, the Devils, and the Flyers. I think if they lose 2 out of the 3, which is very possible at any point, even if they're playing well, especially if those 2 losses are to the Flyers, to the Devils and the Islanders, I think that we're going to have to sell. And I know that's a crappy situation, especially for teams that have had such very high expectations coming into this year, regardless of all the obstacles that were placed in front of them this year. But I think that's the reality of the situation. And it's going to be, I talk about it all the time, and I know it's a cliche, but at the end of the day, it's a tough situation. And I think that really, the only people that could determine their destiny at this point is the Tampa Bay Lightning. So if they want to try, or if it's really a situation of how bad you want it. And I can't sit here and speculate as to how bad the Lightning want to make the playoffs. They're going to have to show it in their play over the course of the next week. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about that. We'll be back on Monday, hopefully talking about a win against the Islanders. And we'll just pick it back up next week, game by game, day by day. Well, not only a win against the Islanders, they're also playing the Devils on Sunday. So a very important weekend in general for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So hopefully we're talking about 2 wins, games that, like I said, they could easily win and they could easily lose both. So let me know in the comments your best predictions about those 2 games over the course of the weekend. And we'll be back Monday to discuss them all. And as a reminder, go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. And that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.